Saratov region, 1996. A gang of thugs attacked a gypsy woman, but soon became victims of her revenge themselves. The winter of 1996 in the Saratov region turned out to be especially harsh. The working settlement of Stepnoy, located 30 kilometers from the regional center, was gradually turning into a ghost of the Soviet past. The agricultural machinery plant, around which the settlement was built in the 60s, stood dead. Workshops with broken windows, rusting equipment, overgrown territory. Out of the 3,000 residents who were here in better times, barely more than 800 remained. The youth were leaving for wherever they could, to Saratov, to Moscow. Some tried to break through abroad. The old people remained, families without funds to move, and those who simply had nowhere to go. The settlement stretched along the only paved road, which had long since turned into a series of pits and potholes. On both sides stood 5-story panel houses, grey, shabby, with peeling plaster and blackened balconies. Between the houses were wastelands overgrown with weeds, where goats grazed in the summer. And in the winter, children built snow fortresses. On the outskirts was a mass of garages made of rusty metal and cinder blocks, where men spent more time than at home repairing ancient Zhigulis and Moskviches that had long since turned into construction sets of spare parts from different cars. Behind the garages began the industrial zone, abandoned warehouses, hangars with collapsed roofs, old transformer booths. This was a territory where even local dogs did not appear. Too many dark corners, too many places where one could stumble upon something unpleasant. In winter, the snow here lay black from soot and industrial dirt, untouched for months. The only traces were chains of tracks from stray dogs, and the rare footprints of boots of those who walked straight from the bus stop to the houses, saving 10 minutes of travel by bypassing the road. Exactly this path was taken every evening by 21-year-old Liya Demyanova. Formerly, she bore the Russian surname of her late father, who died when the girl was 4 years old, but everyone in the settlement knew she was a gypsy. Her mother also died early from tuberculosis when Liya was 12. The girl was assigned to an orphanage in the neighboring district center, from where she ran away 3 times until social services gave up and left her to live with a distant relative in Stepnoy. At 16, Liya was left completely alone. Her aunt left to live with her son in Volgograd, leaving the girl a one-room apartment on the first floor of the last house. Liya worked at the only still functioning enterprise in the settlement, the sewing artel Zarya, where 20 women on ancient industrial machines sewed work clothes for local enterprises. They paid little and irregularly, often in kind, with cuts of fabric that could be sold at the market. But it was at least some work, at least some money. The artel was located in a former kindergarten at the opposite end of the settlement, and every evening Liya returned home alone because she lived farther than all the other workers. She was a girl of small stature, fragile build, with dark hair that she always braided into a tight braid, and brown eyes in which one could read the wariness of a person used to relying only on herself. Liya learned to be invisible. She walked quickly, head down, did not meet the gaze of strangers, and bypassed groups of young men by a kilometer. In the 90s in the Russian hinterland, a woman walking alone in the dark needed to be very careful. Especially if this woman was a gypsy and an orphan without relatives who could stand up for her. In the settlement of Stepnoy, everyone knew the gang of thugs. It was not even a gang in the full sense of the word, but a company of 4 young men who kept the entire settlement in fear. The core of the group was the 3 Sinitsyn brothers, Gennady, 28 years old, Viktor and Alexei, 22. Their father worked at the plant as a mechanic until it closed, then drank himself to death and died of a heart attack. The mother lived with them in a 2-room apartment, but was effectively a recluse. She was afraid to go outside, afraid of her own sons, existed on a tiny pension, and tried not to catch their eye. The Sinitsyn brothers worked nowhere and never. Gennady managed to serve 2 years for hooliganism in the early 90s. Viktor was involved twice for fights, but received suspended sentences. Alexei was the youngest and most aggressive, with a psyche shattered in adolescence by the use of everything that could be obtained in those years, from glue to pharmaceutical drugs. Joining the trio of brothers was Fyodor, nicknamed the Bold, 30 years old. who lived in a dormitory at the closed plant and got by on odd jobs. He was nicknamed the Bald, not because of a lack of hair. He shaved his head himself with an electric razor, unevenly leaving bald patches and spots, but because of the dull, empty expression on his face, as if his brains had been taken out. The foursome spent their days in one of the garages that belonged to the Sinitsin's deceased father. There they drank cheap vodka, played cards, and sometimes repaired stolen car radios and other small appliances for resale. They almost never had money, so they engaged in petty extortion, took money from school children, borrowed from traders at the market, knowing that no one would dare refuse or demand repayment. Several times they beat men who tried to contradict them, and they beat them cruelly, methodically, with obvious pleasure. The local police consisted of one district officer and 2 assistants who preferred not to mess with the thugs, understanding perfectly well that they couldn't pin serious charges on them, and petty squabbles would only create problems. In the settlement, they were feared and hated, but people remained silent. It was a time when the law worked poorly, when people were used to solving problems themselves or enduring. There was no one to complain to, and it was pointless. The only thing that held the thugs back from truly major crimes was the lack of organization and the true cruelty of professional bandits. They were rather aggressive degenerates, hooligans for whom violence was entertainment and a way of self-assertion. February 14th, 1996. The evening was especially cold. The temperature dropped to -20 degrees. The wind drove snow dust through the streets. Visibility was poor. Liya left work around 7 in the evening, wrapped herself in an old sheepskin coat, tied a scarf, and walked home by her usual route through the center of the settlement, past the store, then a turn to the industrial zone, then straight across the wasteland to her house. Usually the road took 25 minutes at a fast pace. The Sinitsin brothers and the Bald spent this day in their garage, drinking vodka. By evening they were drunk, but not to the point of unconsciousness. In that dangerous state when alcohol unties hands and turns off the remnants of conscience, but coordination is still preserved. Around 7 o'clock, they decided to go for a walk, as Gennady put it, to get some air and stretch. Their path lay towards the industrial zone, where they could smoke in the relative warmth of an old transformer booth, in which remnants of heat from recently working equipment still lingered. Liya walked quickly, head down against the wind. She noticed them when they came out from around the corner of an abandoned hangar, about 50 meters from her. 4 silhouettes, swaying, clearly intoxicated. Her heart skipped a beat. She quickened her pace, hoping to slip past without attracting attention, but they noticed her. "Hey, Gypsy!" shouted Victor Sinitsin, the middle brother, and his voice carried in the frosty air. Liya did not answer, walked even faster, almost running. "Stop, expletive! We're talking to you!" This was screamed by Alexei, the youngest, and the foursome headed to cut her off. They were drunk, but moved quickly, cutting off her path to the houses. After a few seconds, it became clear that she would not be able to run away. Liya stopped, pressed her back against the concrete wall of the warehouse. "Leave me alone, please, I haven't done anything to anyone," she said, trying to speak calmly, although her hands were shaking. Gennady, the eldest, came closest. He was a large man, broad in the shoulders, with the puffy face of an alcoholic and small evil eyes. "Haven't done anything? But it seems to me you owe me." "That's it, gypsies owe everyone, that's known," he said and laughed. The others joined in the laughter. "I have no money, none at all. Let me go." Liya reached into her pocket, pulled out a crumpled 10-ruble note, everything she had. "Here, take it." Gennady took the money, looked at it, crumpled it, and threw it into the snow. "We don't need money, we're bored. We want to have fun, and you, little gypsy, are just right for entertainment." What happened next took about 20 minutes. They dragged her into the old hangar, where the rust-covered remains of some equipment stood. They raped her in turns, held her when she tried to break free, beat her. When she screamed, Alexei choked her until she stopped resisting. The Bald was the last. When they finished, Victor wanted to kill her, suggested strangling her or hitting her on the head with an iron rod. But Gennady stopped him. "What for? She won't tell anyone, who will listen to a gypsy orphan, and she won't be able to prove anything." They left her on the floor of the hangar, in a pool of her own blood, in torn clothes, in a state of shock. They left laughing and talking about how they would have to repeat it when they got tired of drinking vodka in the garage. Liya lay there for several hours until she could get up. On a frosty night, she could have died of hypothermia, but the hangar partially protected her from the wind, and her body, young and strong despite everything she had endured, held out. Around midnight, Liya was able to stand up. Somehow she wrapped herself in the torn sheepskin coat, picked up her scarf. Pain pierced her whole body. Between her legs it was wet with blood, her face was swollen from the blows. She made it to her apartment, holding onto the walls of the houses. The neighbors didn't see her. In the settlement, everyone sat at home, windows were curtained. No one stuck their nose out into the frost, without need. At home, Liya undressed, reached the bathroom with difficulty, stood for a long time under hot water, trying to wash off the dirt, blood, the sensation of other people's hands on her body. Then she treated the wounds with brilliant green antiseptic that remained in the first aid kit, drank all the painkillers she found, and lay down on the bed. She didn't cry. There were no tears. There was only an empty, scorched feeling inside, and one thought that gradually crystallized into absolute certainty. They will pay for this. On the morning of February 15th, Liya did not go to work. She lay in bed all day, recovering physically and planning. There were no thoughts in her head about going to the police. She understood perfectly well that there would be no use. 4 men against 1 gypsy orphan. No witnesses. The medical examination needed to be done immediately, and more than 12 hours had already passed. And the district officer would most likely just brush it off. Or even worse, go to the thugs, and they would find out that she tried to complain, then they would kill her, for sure. Revenge. Only revenge made sense. But how? She was alone. They were 4. They are stronger. They fear no one and nothing. Direct confrontation is excluded. Therefore, cunning is needed. She needs to force them to come to her, or she needs to come to them so they don't suspect anything. She needs to deprive them of their advantage. She needs to make it so they are helpless. And the punishment must be such that they understand what they are dying for, or living for. 3 days later, Liya returned to work. She covered the bruises on her face with a thick layer of foundation, answered questions by saying she fell on the ice. Colleagues didn't pry much. Everyone had their own problems. She worked mechanically, while a plan spun in her head. At first, she thought about poison. She could get rat poison, mix it into vodka. But how to force them to drink specifically that vodka? They didn't trust anyone, especially after what they did. Something else was needed. The idea came unexpectedly when she heard a conversation between 2 women on the bus. One complained that she couldn't sleep, and the other advised her to get sleeping pills, strong ones from Soviet times. You sleep like the dead from it. You could explode things nearby. Sleeping pills. Liya remembered that her deceased aunt had left medicines in the closet, including several vials of pills. She returned home and rummaged through the first aid kit. Among other things, she found 2 vials of phenazepam, a strong tranquilizer prescribed in Soviet times for severe neuroses and insomnia. In each vial were 50 tablets. Liya read the instructions. Therapeutic dose, 1 to 2 tablets at night. Overdose causes deep sleep, confusion in severe cases, coma. And if she dissolved 20 to 30 tablets in a bottle of wine, that would be enough. To knock out 4 grown men, she only needed to force them to drink. For the next 2 weeks, Liya watched the thugs, reconstructing their schedule. They appeared in their garage every day, around 2 in the afternoon, spent time there until late evening. Sometimes they went somewhere, but always returned. On Fridays, they usually got especially drunk. Liya decided to act on Friday, March 7th, 3 weeks after the rape. On the morning of March 7th, she did not go to work, claiming she was sick. She went to the market, bought 3 bottles of cheap fortified Solncidar wine, sweet, thick, with a strong aroma that could mask any aftertaste. At home, she crushed 100 tablets of phenazepam into fine powder, divided it into 3 parts, carefully opened the bottles, poured the powder into each, shook them for several minutes until the powder completely dissolved. The wine became slightly cloudy, but not so much that it was striking. She corked the bottles back up, wrapped the necks with electrical tape so it looked like they hadn't been opened. Now, the hardest part, delivering the wine. She couldn't just come and offer it. They would immediately suspect a trick. A legend was needed, a story that would explain why she was bringing them booze. Liya put on the most revealing outfit she had. A short skirt, a tight-fitting blouse, put on bright, provocative makeup, took a bag with the 3 bottles, and went to the garages. Around 5 in the evening, she approached their garage. Voices, laughter, the sound of a radio could be heard inside. She knocked on the metal door. The conversations died down. "Who's there?" shouted Gennady. "It's me, Liya. Remember me?" A pause, then the sound of a bolt sliding back. The door opened. Gennady stood in the opening. Behind him, the other 3 were visible. All with bottles of beer in their hands, all stared at her. "What do you want?" asked Gennady. But interest already sounded in his voice. Liya forced herself to smile. "I came, well, to apologize for behaving like that back then. I shouldn't have resisted, screamed. You just wanted to have fun. I thought about it and realized I was a fool and decided to smooth things over." She took the bottles out of the bag. "I brought wine. Good. Strong. Let's drink together, and I'll show that I don't hold a grudge." The 4 exchanged glances. It was so unexpected that they didn't immediately find words. Then Victor laughed. "Well, you gypsy or something. You came yourself, and with wine too. Maybe your brains really fell into place." Alexei reached for the bottles, took one, looked at it in the light. "Not poisoned?" Liya shrugged her shoulders. "I'll drink the first one myself if you're afraid." Gennady weighed the situation for a few seconds, then grinned. "Come in. Since you came to make peace, we'll make peace." They dragged her inside the garage. It was warm from a homemade potbelly stove, smoky, smelling of alcohol and machine oil. The bald slammed the door shut and bolted it. Liya felt her heart pounding, but kept her face calm, smiling. Gennady opened the first bottle, poured it into faceted glasses. "Well, come on, Gypsy, drink first. Show you're not poisoning us." Liya took the glass, drank a large gulp. The wine was cloyingly sweet, slightly bitter, but the bitterness was lost in the general taste. She passed the glass back. "See? Normal wine." The 4 drank at once, according to Russian tradition, then another round. The first bottle went quickly. "And you're not such a fool as I thought," said Gennady, examining Liya. "Maybe we'll really have a fun time, only this time you won't struggle, right?" Liya nodded, continuing to smile. Inside she was shaking with disgust and hatred, but she held on. "I won't, I promise." Victor opened the second bottle. They drank, snacking on remnants of bread and sausage, talked, becoming more and more brazen. Alexei was already groping Liya's leg. The bald smiled stupidly, looking at her. 20 minutes after starting the second bottle, the bald was the first to start nodding off. "Something's made me groggy," he muttered, and laid his head on the table. Victor tried to stand up, swayed, grabbed the edge of the workbench. "What the—" "Something's wrong in the wine." But he couldn't finish speaking. He slumped to the floor, leaning his back against the wall. His eyes closed by themselves. Gennady and Alexei realized what was happening. Simultaneously, Gennady tried to grab Liya, but his hands didn't obey. His thoughts swam. "Expletive! Poisoned!" He took a step toward her, but his legs gave way. He collapsed to his knees. Alexei crawled to the door, tried to move the bolt, but his fingers couldn't hold the metal. A minute later, he fell next to the door and stopped moving. Liya stood in the middle of the garage, looking at the 4 prostrate men. Everyone was breathing, but they were in a deep, almost comatose sleep. The phenazepam acted quickly and powerfully, exactly as she calculated. Now the most important part began. She had several hours while they slept. This should be enough. She left the garage, looking around. It was already dark. The garage territory was deserted. She returned home, took a large bag in which she had previously put everything necessary: rope, electrical tape, a kitchen knife, large, well-sharpened plastic film, rubber gloves, and returned to the garage. The men didn't move, breathing deeply and evenly. Liya started by tying each one. With rope, she bound their hands behind their backs. then their legs, then tied them to iron pipes and supports in the garage so they couldn't move from their places when they woke up. She taped their mouths with wide electrical tape in several layers. She worked quickly, methodically, without unnecessary movements. When she finished, all 4 were securely immobilized. Each sat or lay by his support, unable to move. Then she simply waited, sat on an old chair in the corner of the garage, looked at them, and waited for them to wake up. The potbelly stove was slowly cooling down. It was becoming cooler in the garage. About 2 hours passed before the first of them began to stir. It was Victor. He groaned, tried to open his eyes, tried to move his hands and realized he couldn't. His eyes flew open, filled with horror. He tried to scream, but the electrical tape muffled the sound to an incoherent mooing. One by one, the others began to wake up. Gennady, Alexei, the bald. Everyone experienced the same thing. Confusion turning into panic when they realized their position. They jerked their hands, tried to free themselves, mooed, looked at Liya with wide open eyes. She stood up, came closer so everyone could see her. "Do you remember what you did to me 3 weeks ago?" she asked quietly. The 4 froze, looking at her. "Did you think I would just endure it, that I wouldn't tell anyone, that I would forget? Maybe you yourselves have already almost forgotten. For you, it was just entertainment?" "Yes. A way to kill boredom." She walked up to Gennady, squatted in front of him, looked into his eyes. "But I haven't forgotten, and I will never forgive." Liya took the knife out of the bag. At the sight of the blade, the 4 began to twitch with renewed vigor, mooing, trying to scream through their taped mouths. She walked up to Gennady. "You were the first, so I'll start with you." Gennady shook his head. There was animal terror in his eyes. Liya cut the pants on him, pulled them down along with his underwear. He tried to squeeze his legs, but they were tied and bound to the iron support. What she did next took several minutes. Gennady tried to lose consciousness from the pain, but she slapped him on the face, not letting him go into the darkness. When she finished, she placed what had been cut off on the plastic film nearby. Gennady was in shock. His eyes rolled back. Foamy saliva mixed with blood from torn lips came out of his mouth through the tape. Then she moved on to Victor, then to Alexei, then to the bald. She did the same with each one. They couldn't move, couldn't scream, could only watch and feel. When she finished with the last one, all 4 were in a state of deep shock. Some lost consciousness and came to. But the blood loss was not yet critical. Liya bandaged the wounds with rags so they wouldn't bleed out too quickly. She gathered all 4 cut-off parts, put them in a metal bowl, and went out of the garage. Outside it was dark and cold. Stars burned brightly in the black sky. She walked a few meters to the place where a pack of stray dogs always roamed. There were about 5 or 6 of them. They lived among the garages, fed on garbage and what compassionate residents brought. The dogs smelled the scent of blood immediately. They approached cautiously, sniffing. Liya poured the contents of the bowl onto the snow. The dogs pounced, growling and snapping at each other. A minute later, nothing remained on the snow except dark spots. Liya returned to the garage, tore the tape off Gennady's mouth. He wheezed, tried to speak, but could only make inarticulate sounds. She dragged him to the garage door, so that through the crack he could see outside, to where the dogs had just feasted. "Did you see?" she asked. Gennady closed his eyes. Tears flowed down his face. "You saw what they ate. Those were yours and your brother's last opportunities to be men. Now you are nothing. You are worse than dead. You are living corpses, eunuchs, whom even dogs didn't consider valuable." She returned inside, looked at the 4. Everyone was conscious. Everyone was looking at her. "I could have killed you. That would have been mercy. But I won't. You will live. You will live and remember every day what you lost. You will see pity or disgust in people's eyes when they find out what happened to you. You will wake up every morning and remember. This is your punishment, not death. Life." Liya gathered her things, wiped the knife, put everything in the bag, took off her gloves, threw them into the potbelly stove along with the bloody rags. The fire was still smouldering, everything quickly charred. She looked once more at the 4 bound, mutilated men. Then she opened the garage door wide. Cold air rushed inside, and she walked away into the night. In the morning, they were found by one of the owners of the neighboring garages, who came for a tool, saw the open door, and, hearing groans, looked inside and was stunned. He called an ambulance and the police. When the doctors and investigators arrived, the scene was so shocking that several people from the operative group ran outside to vomit. All 4 were hospitalized. They survived, although Gennady was on the verge of death several times from blood poisoning. The investigation began immediately. They interviewed all the residents of the settlement, checked all possible connections, but the thugs refused to say who did it. To all questions, they remained silent or answered that they didn't remember. The investigators couldn't understand why the victims didn't want to help find the criminal. Only a few weeks later did it become clear. They were afraid. Afraid of the one who could do such a thing to them. Afraid that if they named a name, then next time they would really be killed. Liya was interrogated as a witness, but very formally. She said she was home alone, didn't go out anywhere all evening. There was no evidence to the contrary. No one saw her near the garages. Neighbors confirmed that the light in her window was on all evening. She threw the knife into the river, burned the clothes. She bought the ropes and electrical tape for cash at a market in another district. No receipts. The pills were old, without a prescription in her name. No direct evidence. The case reached a dead end. The official version remained unknown. Unofficially, rumors spread very quickly in the settlement. Many guessed who did it and why, but no one spoke aloud. Moreover, public opinion was strange, not sympathy for the mutilated thugs, but rather satisfaction. Everyone knew what those 4 did in the settlement. Everyone feared and hated them, and someone finally put them in their place. Cruelly, monstrously, but justly in its own way. A month later, Liya quit the artel, packed her things, and left the settlement. Where, no one knew. She simply vanished. The Sinitsin brothers and the Bald were discharged from the hospital and returned home. They changed completely. They became quiet, withdrawn, avoided people. Gennady hanged himself after 6 months. Viktor drank himself to death, died of cirrhosis after 3 years. Alexei went mad, ended up in a psychiatric hospital. The Bald simply disappeared, left the settlement, and no one saw him again. This story was never officially solved. In the archives of the Regional Department of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, the case lies with the stamp unsolved. Although everyone who worked on the investigation understood perfectly well who the perpetrator was, it was impossible to prove. And frankly speaking, there was no special desire to. Some crimes remain unpunished, not because the criminals are not found, but because society tacitly recognizes the justice of the deed. The story of Liya and the gang of thugs became something of an urban legend in the Saratov region. Scary, cruel, but carrying within it a lesson that any violence sooner or later returns to the abuser, sometimes in the most terrible form.